Yo, let's talk about colonialism in Africa. It's a heavy topic, but it's crucial to understand the roots of many issues we see today. Colonialism wasn't just a historical event, it was a transformative period that reshaped the entire continent. Imagine a whole continent carved up like a birthday cake. But this wasn't a celebration. It was a ruthless division of land and resources. Instead of frosting and sprinkles, you got European powers fighting over resources and land. They were after gold, diamonds, rubber, and other valuable commodities. That's colonialism in a nutshell. A power grab that disregarded the lives and cultures of millions of people. From the late 19th to the mid-20th century, European nations went on a mad dash to conquer Africa. They sent explorers, missionaries, and soldiers to claim territories. They called it the Scramble for Africa, but it was more like a scramble for wealth and dominance, more like the scramble to exploit, am I right? They extracted resources, exploited labor, and imposed their own systems of governance. They drew up borders with zero regard for the people actually living there. These arbitrary lines split communities and created new tensions. They split up ethnic groups who had lived together for centuries. Families and tribes were divided, leading to long-term social and political issues. And they pitted communities against each other, all in the name of profit and power. Divide and rule was the strategy, and it left deep scars. It was a mess, people, a real mess. The colonial powers didn't care about the chaos they were creating. And guess what? The effects of this colonial chaos are still felt today. The borders drawn by colonial powers are still in place, and they continue to cause conflicts. We're talking about conflicts, poverty, and instability. Many of the issues Africa faces today can be traced back to colonialism, all thanks to the legacy of colonialism. The exploitation and division left a lasting impact on the continent. But don't get me wrong, Africa is not a continent defined by its past. It's a place of incredible resilience, innovation, and cultural richness. It's a place of incredible resilience, innovation, and cultural richness. Despite the challenges, African people have shown remarkable strength and creativity. But to understand Africa today, we got to unpack this colonial baggage. We need to acknowledge the past to build a better future. So buckle up, people. It's gonna be a bumpy ride. But it's a journey worth taking to truly appreciate the complexity and beauty of Africa. Remember those borders the Europeans drew? Yeah, those lines in the sand are still causing major headaches today. See, when you divide people who should be united and unite people who should be divided, conflict is inevitable. You're basically handing them a map to war zones. It's like giving a bunch of toddlers a drum set and saying, have fun, but try not to make too much noise. These artificial borders created divisions where none existed before. They lumped together different ethnic groups with different languages, religions, and customs, and they separated communities that had strong historical and cultural ties. It's no surprise that many African countries are still grappling with ethnic tensions and conflicts. The seeds were sown during colonialism. But here's the thing, it's not just about the borders themselves, it's about the systems of power and inequality that those borders represent. Colonialism created winners and losers. It privileged certain groups over others, and those power imbalances persist today, fueling resentment and conflict. So, yeah, those lines on the map, they're not just lines, they're scars that remind us of the enduring legacy of colonialism. Let's be real, folks. When we talk about colonialism, we often hear the sanitized version of history, the one that talks about spreading civilization, building schools, and bringing progress to the so-called uncivilized parts of the world. But let's cut through the noise and get to the heart of the matter. Colonialism wasn't about spreading civilization or building schools. It was a facade, a convenient narrative to justify the real agenda. It was about one thing: extraction. The European powers were not interested in the well-being of the local populations. They were interested in what they could take. European powers saw Africa as a giant ATM ready to be emptied. They carved up the continent like a pie, each taking a slice to exploit for their own gain. They plundered the continent's resources, from gold and diamonds to rubber and timber. These were not just resources, they were the lifeblood of African economies, ripped away to fuel European industrialization. They exploited African labor, forcing people to work on plantations and in mines for little or no pay. Families were torn apart, communities were disrupted, and cultures were eroded. It was basically a continent-wide smash-and-grab operation. The scale of exploitation was staggering and the impact was devastating. And the worst part, they rigged the system to benefit themselves, even after they supposedly granted independence. The so-called independence was often just a transfer of power to local elites, who continued to serve the interests of their former colonial masters. They created economies that were dependent on exporting raw materials to Europe. This dependency was by design, ensuring that African countries remained economically tethered to their former colonizers. They imposed unfair trade deals that kept African countries trapped in a cycle of poverty. These deals were structured to benefit the colonizers, leaving African nations with little room to develop their own industries. It's like robbing someone blind and then offering them a high-interest loan to get back on their feet. The economic systems were rigged to ensure that wealth flowed out of Africa and into Europe. The legacy of this economic exploitation is still felt today. The scars of colonialism run deep, affecting every aspect of life in many African countries. Many African countries are struggling with poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment. These issues are not just historical, they are ongoing challenges that stem from a deeply entrenched system of exploitation. They're stuck in a system that was designed to keep them down. The infrastructure, the education systems, the economies, all were set up to serve the interests of the colonizers, not the local populations. But here's the good news: Africans are fighting back. They are reclaiming their narratives, their resources, and their futures. They're demanding fair trade, investing in education, and building more equitable economies. The new generation is tech-savvy, innovative, and determined to break free from the chains of the past. They're proving that Africa is not a charity case. It's a continent full of potential, creativity, and resilience. It's a continent with immense potential just waiting to be unlocked. The future of Africa is bright and its people are ready to take control of their own destinies. You know what's messed up? It's not just the obvious things we think about when we hear the word colonialism. Colonialism wasn't just about controlling land and resources. It was a multifaceted strategy that went far beyond the physical occupation of territories. It was about controlling minds, too. The colonizers knew that to truly dominate a people, they had to reshape their way of thinking. European powers used education as a tool to impose their culture and values on African societies. They established schools that taught European languages, history, and customs, often at the expense of local traditions and knowledge. They taught their languages, their history, and their worldview. The curriculum was designed to make African children see the world through a European lens. It was like a giant brainwashing experiment. The goal was to create a class of people who would be loyal to the colonial powers and perpetuate their dominance. They wanted Africans to see themselves as inferior, to internalize the idea that they were somehow less than their European counterparts, to believe that their own cultures and traditions were backward and primitive. This was a deliberate attempt to erode the self-esteem and identity of African people, and guess what? It worked. The effects of this psychological manipulation were profound and long-lasting, to some extent at least. Many Africans began to adopt the values and beliefs of their colonizers, often at the expense of their own cultural heritage. Many Africans internalized these colonial ideas. They started to see themselves through the eyes of their oppressors, leading to a deep-seated sense of inferiority. They started to see themselves through the eyes of their oppressors. This internalized oppression has had lasting effects on the psyche of many African people. And this legacy of mental colonialism is still with us today. The remnants of this indoctrination can be seen in various aspects of contemporary African life. We see it in the language barriers that exist within and between African countries. The imposition of European languages has created divisions and communication challenges. We see it in the way some Africans still look up to the West as the model of progress and development. The allure of Western culture and lifestyle continues to influence many, but here's the thing. Africans are reclaiming their narratives. There's a growing movement to rediscover and celebrate African heritage. They're celebrating their own languages, cultures, and histories. Efforts are being made to revive indigenous languages and traditions that were suppressed during colonial rule. They're decolonizing their minds and rejecting the Eurocentric worldview that was imposed on them. This process involves critically examining and challenging the colonial narratives that have been internalized. It's a long and difficult process, but it's happening. Activists, educators, and community leaders are at the forefront of this movement, working tirelessly to promote a more authentic and empowering understanding of African identity. Because true liberation requires more than just political independence. It requires a complete transformation of the mind and spirit, a reclamation of self-worth and cultural pride. It requires mental emancipation as well. Only then can Africans fully break free from the chains of colonialism and build a future that is truly their own.